This is again, this is the 2023 Public Health Ethics Intensive. We're offering CME credits and CEU credits. So make sure when you register that you check those boxes. Make sure you participate in the pre-test or the post-test. Make sure that you ask questions. Make sure that you turn your phone off. make sure, make sure that you turn the ringer off. Make sure that if you have to step away, make sure you turn the camera off. You remember when one of the anchors for CNN, Mayor Haygood, during COVID, he was dressed like up to here, and and he forgot and walked away in his underpants. So
Not a good thing to do.
so if you have to step away, please go ahead and make sure that you are appropriately dressed.
Yes, of course.
This year, our conversation is 25 years of healing the soul, mental health, suicide prevention, autism, and lupus. These are important conversations to have because these are the kinds of things that affect the Black community and the brown community and the poor community. There's so much going on in the world right now. There's so much going on right now, and many of us feel stifled to share empathy. You know, if we have to kind of seem like we have to kind of balance support for Israel and what that means, and support for Palestinian humans and what that means. And so it's a challenge right now in our world. But this is what it means to live a democracy. But what is in front of us in the United States of America are increased mental health situations that's leading to gun violence. That now, let me be clear: the fact that there's an increase in the fact that there's an increase in mental health issues is not necessarily a mental health, like a mental health sickness that we're talking about. Many gun violence issues take place because of mental trauma. In other words, a person had a very, very bad day, and they then turn a weapon on themselves or somebody else. Not they had mental health issues, they had equal easy access to a weapon that could cause and end life. And therefore, we have to focus on mental health and suicide prevention. We got to focus on autism. Many of our young people, Black and brown young people, are affected with autism. As the head of the National Center for Research and Healthcare, Dr. Warren commenced a lot of work on ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. These children are going through stuff, and if you remember, Mayor Haygood, the gentleman that worked with you on your team, he came and worked with us as well. I think he's a controller, the city plan, whatever he was. I can't remember the name, but he's an attorney. Right. He was working with us for a while there on how do we deal with our young people who are raised in traumatic situations. Yeah. How do we help them? You know, because after we do the best we can, this year, we invited Mr. Sonny Etienne to speak to the students at TIMS, to Tuskegee Institute Middle School, and he's going to do a phenomenal job. But after it's all over, they go home. So we have to try to figure out on several different angles, including the religious places and the church place and the civic organization and the mosque and the synagogues and the churches. How in the world do we come together to make a place safer for our children? Additionally, lupus almost is at the point now where everyone knows someone who has or has been affected by lupus. Everyone knows someone who's been affected by lupus. So we're bringing these conversations to the front so that we could deal with them. One of the things in my first month at the National Center, Dr. Warren sent me this. No, that's before I got here. And then we talked about when I got here. But I was meeting with Dr. Warren and Dr. Earl, and he introduced me to a term that I never heard of before. It's called excess death. In other words, excess deaths are those deaths over and above those of our white counterparts. And there were about seven seven categories. It's got a message. 7 categories of excess death, and one was removed. And quite frankly, we need to construct our own excess deaths because we need to make sure gun violence is on there.
Yeah.
We need to make sure HIV is on there. We need to make sure pandemic. How is it that more black people are dying from the pandemic than our white brothers and sisters are dying from the pandemic? So therefore, excess death is a kind of things that's what we focus on. How do we minimize excess death, especially in our community? Well, it's hard to do so when you live in a food desert. It's harder still to do so when you don't have a pharmacy that's close by. Oh my God, if you live in a medical desert, one of the things we talked about all the time is if you get a heart attack in Tuskegee and you have to wait for an ambulance to come from so far away and pick you up and then take you far away, it's a challenge and lives could be lost. So that's the work we had ahead of us. So we thank each and every one of you who are signing in today and who are ready to enjoy this conversation, because we're pushing forward to make sure we reach out to the least, the lost, and the left out. Those persons who need to understand that we're sufficiently trustworthy that they can give us their trust. And if we do that, if we maintain our trustworthiness, then we could, for example, there's several, in the Black community, there are many people who will call their pastor before they call their doctor. But Haygood, this is true. Somebody's having a heart attack. They call the pastor, my chest is hurting. Right. Call the doctor. This is our reality. This is our reality. So today I wanted to introduce to us our esteemed mayor of Tuskegee, Alabama, Mayor Tony Haygood, and he will bring us greetings as he does each and every year, and which demonstrates his support not only for Tuskegee University and the National Center for Bioethics and Research in Healthcare, but also for the work that we're doing. And by the way, I bring you greetings today from President Charlotte Morris, who is a tremendous supporter, and I don't see him on here yet, but Provost Hargrove. So I want to bring you Keith Hargrove greetings from them. All right, Mayor Haygood.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Hodge. And as you say, again, it's my pleasure to be here simply to bring greetings on behalf of the City Council and the entire city of Tuskegee. Greetings to Dr. Charlotte Morris, Dr. Reuben Warren, yourself, Dr. Hodge, and your entire team there. And again, thank you for the work that you continue to do that's so critical in our community, so many other communities. We're just blessed and fortunate to have Tuskegee University here in our community, and the work that you continue to do that not only serves our community in this part of the state of Alabama, but tends to go throughout the world in great conversation, great research that is being shared and exercised in so many places. I think the theme at this 12th annual Public Health Intensive is most appropriate this year. 25 years of healing, the soul. The soul is the critical thing to us. And we've got to recognize the need for healing and the maintenance of our soul, particularly when you talk about mental health, suicide prevention, autism, and lupus. One of the things, other reason I say this is very timely, we just lost, I don't know if many of you know, outside of this area, we just lost a mayor over in Smith Station to suicide. Smith Station is in Lee County, adjacent county to Macon County, next to us. And unfortunately, a fairly younger mayor, when you consider mayors and the mid-range mayors, about 50-something, we lost him to suicide over the weekend. So these topics are most appropriate because we don't know what conditions people are in, what they're dealing with. As Dr. Hodge has said, the challenges we face right now in our country and around the world are huge. They're insurmountable for some, and that weighs on them. So if they don't understand how we can take different steps to address that, it becomes a burden to them that they try to handle on their own. So the research that you're doing, the information that you're sharing is most critical. Lupus, we have adopted a month each year in which we have activities on our city square regarding lupus. And we were surprised at the number of people who came out who were affected by it and all the relatives who came out with them. We have a program here at Municipal Complex, but we go on the square. So these areas are critical to our community. And so I applaud you for taking them on and sharing that information. And finally, I want to say that anything that we can do in the city of Tuskegee to work with you and your work there at the Bioethics Center, please let us know. We find you to be a tremendous partner. We want to do all that we can do to expand your work, to share it with people in our community, to share it outside of the educational community so that our people can understand it and understand how critical it is to tag into that and participate in seminars such as this and programs and the different things that you offer. So again, let me say, first of all, which I did not say, is welcome to the city of Tuskegee. Welcome to our community, although you can't be here physically right now, welcome virtually, and we look forward to the time that you can return to Tuskegee physically and let us share with you some of our historic sites and some of our powerful spirit that we share from Tuskegee that's built inside of us. It's built inside of us because of the work that people like you do to continue to expand the education, the studies, the research that has been done and build upon that. So thank you again for the work that you do. Welcome to Tuskegee. We look forward to you continue to do your work. And as I always say, and I hope you realize, and I know some of you do, but never underestimate the importance of the work that you do. You do it because you've chosen to do it. But sometimes you go well beyond what is expected, and it's not always recognized. But there are people who tremendously benefit from the work that you do, regardless of what's in front of you on paper. There are people, individuals who are affected. So like right now, we're trying to deal with how did this situation happen with a mayor at that age in a city that was seen to be doing very well, but it was some other personal thing. So again, thank you. You never know who you're impacting, where you're impacting them, and how powerful your work is. So my hat's off to you. And again, my thanks to you on behalf of all of our citizens and so many others for the work you do and research along bioethics and these particular topics this year that you have chosen, particularly autism, suicide prevention, mental health, which is critical around the country right now, and lupus. Again, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Haygood. He said something that was very important. I wonder, you said the topics we have chosen, and that is true, but sometimes I wonder to what extent those topics chose us. As you just mentioned, with the mayor, and our heart goes out to the family that suicide prevention and gun violence, and we did gun violence last year, and we continue to do it throughout the year, that these things are, they're calling us, they're yelling to us. And if we do not take up the mantle, we must wonder what's going to happen to our generation and the next generation. Thank you very much, Dr. Mayor Haygood, for your wonderful words. And thank you very much for being such a supporter over the years of what we do at the National Center for Bioethics in Research and Healthcare at Tuskegee University. I'm going to now, each year we have students as hosts, and we do have them this year, but for some reason I'm talking to her now, but she doesn't have she's missing something. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Reverby, and then I'll make sure the student Aria Aldridge is on for her part. Dr. Susan Reverby is a historian of American healthcare, whose major research has been on women's health and women health workers and professionals, the ethics of public health and research. Her books include, and she has co-edited, The America's Working Women, Healthcare in America, Essays in Social History, and a monograph, Order to Care, The Dilemma of American Nursing. The next project was focused on what is called the infamous so-called Tuskegee Syphilis Study, that we know as the United States Public Health Service Syphilis Study at Tuskegee. The 4 decades long 1932 to 1972 public health service research in which African American men were deceived into believing they were being treated, not monitored for the disease. Susan Reverby also edited a amazing study, and if you don't have it in your library, you can't do research on the so-called syphilis study without this book, is Tuskegee's Truth, Rethinking the Tuskegee Syphilis Study. It's a book about this thick with like everything ever written about it that she went through and chronographed. And then the next book is Examining Tuskegee, the infamous syphilis study and its legacy, which appeared in 2009. She was also part of the legacy committee that led to President Clinton offering a federal apology for the study in 1997. So her accolades go a whole lot further than that. But for the sake of time, and there is Aria. Okay, perfect. For the sake of time, we are going to introduce you now, Dr. Susan Reverby. I spent some time with her and her wonderful husband, Bill. They treated me like family in their home in Boston. It was lovely being there. So I introduce you now, Dr. Reverby, who's going to give reflections on the journey of the National Center. Take it away, Dr. Reverby.
Thank you. Okay, I'm here. Do I have to pin myself to? Give me that. I'll do it. There I am. Hi. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm really sorry that I'm not in Tuskegee again. It is an important place in my life, both because of my research and also because my husband's father actually was the supply officer for the Tuskegee Airmen, and his parents were married in Tuskegee. And as I said to him, only in America could your northern white, that time Jewish girlfriend, take you to Tuskegee and drive you around and say, here's Dad's airfield. Here's where Mom and Dad got married. And I used to tease the former mayor that I was going to retire and be the only white cab driver in Tuskegee, because I think I know all the back roads by now. Anyway, I'm really honored to be here, and I'm going to see if I can get my screen to share so that I can show you just a few images to illustrate my talk. So let's see if this works. Hold on. Yeah, but let's see. See if that does it. Okay, hold on, and view slideshow. Okay, ta-da. Okay, share. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, terrific. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about the history of the last 25 years, but I want to talk briefly about how the center itself came about, and why it matters now more than anything else. So that's how I've sort of just organized this. Now, let me just find this. Okay. Why is it? You are share screening. Okay, connected. Sorry. Why is it not? Oh, there we go. Wait a minute. Okay, so part of the reason for understanding why the apology came about actually has to do with this man. His name was John Cutler. He was a public health service officer, and he served in Tuskegee during the study in the 1950s. But in 1992, it was the 20th anniversary of the end of the study, and two films were made, one in Great Britain called Bad Blood and another one in the US called Deadly Deception. And a bunch of us who were working on the history of the study were at a conference, and the bioethics of the study, were at a conference in the University of Virginia, and part of the film got shown. And let me make sure, I hope this will work. And here was this clip from Cutler speaking about the study.
My regret is, in terms of the study, I have none.
So, sorry, let me back up here for a second. So we were completely horrified. It was 20 years after the end of the study. Here was someone who had worked in it. It seemed pretty obvious that the easiest thing to do was to say, oops, you know, a long time ago, we used to be racist. We're not racist anymore, or something to the equivalent of this. But he didn't do that. He sat there and said, I have nothing to apologize. We did nothing wrong. And we were so angry about that the discussion started to happen around the issue that there had never been a federal apology for the study. So that started in 94. In January of 1996, a group of us were convened at Tuskegee, and it was people in the bioethics field, historians, public health people who worked on African-American issues, a variety of people from Tuskegee itself. And we formed what we called the Legacy Committee, and then we took another year and a half basically to lobby the then Clinton administration to get what you all know as the federal apology, which finally happened on May 16th, 1997, at the White House, and at the White House. Although we asked that it be actually in Tuskegee, it didn't happen in Tuskegee because they couldn't figure out how to do it given Clinton's schedule. At least that was the explanation. But as our legacy committee was organized and we thought about what we wanted, we really thought about the issue of an apology. And as I always say to audiences when I talk about the apology or an apology in general, all an apology does is acknowledge that something wrong happened, right? I'm really sorry I stepped on your toe. I'm really sorry I did X. I'm really sorry that this study happened. But it doesn't predict, as they say in the field, future behavior. It doesn't tell us what's going to happen next. It just acknowledges that a wrong was done. And so we were really concerned that it would be, and it was an incredibly emotional event in the East Room of the White House. And we were really happy that it had finally happened. I think it was really important to many of us and to many of the families of the men who had been in the study who were there. At that point, there were still 6 men who were still alive, and some of them and their family members were there. And then the service itself was beamed into Tuskegee, but it wasn't enough. And so one of the things we talked about is what would help carry this forward, what would be important to do. And so what we asked for was the formation of a national center for bioethics. And our imagination at the time, at least mine, I can't speak for everybody who was there, must have been 20 or 30 of us on the committee, but I had started my work on this study in Tuskegee when I was a fellow, as we were called. There wasn't the term sister fellows at the moment. I was a fellow at the Du Bois Institute here in Boston, in Cambridge, at Harvard, that Skip Gates run. It was then called the Du Bois Institute for African-American Studies. It's now called the Hutchins Institute, but it was a place where people who were doing research broadly conceived on African-American or African issues could come together. And it was a great experience. I both started the first book there, and I finished the last book when I was a fellow there a second time. And I found that community really important to my intellectual growth and to the work that I did and to what I could learn. It was like going to graduate school all over again in a different way. So I think in my fantasy, this is what I thought the National Center could be at Tuskegee, that it would be a way to have people who are interested in issues of health disparities and healthcare and bioethics could come as, quote, fellows to do that kind of work. And, I wasn't in charge. Other people had different ideas about different models of how to do it. And so the center evolved in different kinds of ways, both meeting the needs of the Tuskegee University itself, of Macon County, and I think less so a kind of national impact over these years. And I'm hopeful that as we go forward, we can at least rethink. Obviously, it's not up to me or the Legacy Committee anymore, but to all of you on the ground there to figure out what else should happen. So part of the reason I think it really matters, and the reason I use the word crisis, although we seem to overuse it a lot, is because, of course, we're so aware of the extent to which health disparities that exist in the world are driven by social and economic inequalities and inequities. And it's not like we can, by studying all of this, fix it immediately, but it means that we at least have to help people working in these fields understand what it means. So, for example, years ago when physicians helped start a health center in Mississippi, for example, they wrote, this is before Medicare and Medicaid existed, they wrote prescriptions for food because they understood that giving people aspirin was one thing, but what people really needed was food and the money to pay for their food. So thinking through what health disparities really mean, I think, is really crucial to the work that goes forward, but not just documenting them over and over and over again, which unfortunately seems to be what happens a lot, but really trying to think about solutions, what can be done on the ground, both locally, nationally, and of course internationally around these kinds of issues. But I also think what's important is to think about how we reuse and rethink the study itself. So there's a lovely sentence that Carol Levine wrote years ago that I think is really helpful. She says, bioethics was born in scandal and raised in protectionism. That is, it was born during the scandals of the Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital in Brooklyn, the hepatitis live vaccines, viruses given to children, and then, of course, the study in Macon County and in Tuskegee. And so the idea was to protect future people in research studies. But I think we've gone beyond the need for protectionism, and we have to think much more about justice, which was also considered an important principle here, but it sometimes gets really lost. And so I think it's really important to think about the study itself and how we tell and retell the story. I actually work with a group of people at TED-Ed. If you want a 5-minute version of the study with the animation, Google TED-Ed and the syphilis experiment, and you'll get a thing that's, I think, useful, I hope, to show in schools and to try to tell the history of the study itself to another generation. But if you Google, for example, Tuskegee and conspiracy, you get lots of things like this, that this was in a Black Panther paper in the early 70s when hundreds of Black men discovered massacred in a syphilis experiment, that kind of language. Or even more recently, this is a picture of a man getting up, for those of you who know anything about it medical, you can see it's a blood draw. The man's, the physician's hand is pulling the blood out of the hand, but even National Public Radio says a man receives an injection during this Tuskegee syphilis study in the 1930s. Picture, by the way, was taken in the 1950s, mind you, but in any event, again, it's this misreading of what happens. And you see it over and over again. Saturday Night Live has actually done 2 issues of it, one in which Kenan Thompson, and this one, plays a patient who doesn't want to be treated by the doctor, and he says why, and he starts yelling Tuskegee, Tuskegee, Tuskegee. And then more recently in 2011, Daniel Kaluuya plays a doctor. Let's see if I can get this to come up. You can find it on YouTube. But again, it's this idea that somehow you can't trust white physicians because of the history of the study. So I want to remind people, and those of you who live there and who are family members or part of the community know this, these are some of the pictures taken by the Public Health Service in the 1950s of the men in the study. And I think it's just important over and over again to examine, to look at these pictures, to remember that these were human beings with wives and children and boyfriends and girlfriends and grandchildren and honest working men in the community, and that we should think about who they were. This is a picture of Nurse Eunice Rivers Laurie handing out a vitamin packet to one of the men in the study. This is her in one of the fields handing in both the aspirins and then a vial of cough medicine, not cough medicine, but a kind of iron tonic, to explain to this person that this was going to help, of course, which it wouldn't with the syphilis. This is another picture of a man outside one of the churches. This is my favorite picture because I just think this man is gorgeous, and such a strong and wonderful face outside a small store. And then this, of course, is a picture of a blood draw, which often gets cropped again and misused to make it look like someone's being injected, the same with the blood draw that Nurse Rivers is doing here. So I think it's really important that as we move forward as a historian, I think getting the facts and telling the stories in different kinds of ways, depending on who the community is, and be as accurate as we can about the story. But I also think it's worth thinking about what else we don't talk about when we talk about the study. So I've listed just a few of these here as a way to think about it. And I've always said, for example, if there had been 40 acres and a mule that was supposed to be promised after the Civil War, the men's families might not have stayed in Tuskegee and had other economic choices that could have led them off the land. They could have moved more easily. There could have been more capital accumulation. Not that it's bad to stay in Tuskegee, but they might have had other options economically in their lives. If the men had had access to decent healthcare insurance, they would never have been as vulnerable to the offers of free care. And when I spoke to I remember Mr. Shaw in particular saying to me, one of the men in the study, if we thought we were doing the right thing for our families, we were trying to save money, we didn't have anything, it was the middle of the Depression. So if you think about it, if there had been national health insurance, if it had, when we started to argue for it in 1919, if it had been available, and if it had ever been available for people in the rural South and for Black folks in the rural South, then they wouldn't have been as vulnerable to the expectation. If there had been more sex education, condoms available, and public health, there wouldn't have been so much syphilis in the first place. if racist assumptions about biological differences hadn't existed, the study would not have been done in the first place too. And then the somewhat more controversial, but I think important to think about, is that it's about consciousness and politics, not so much skin color always, that both Black doctors and nurses were central, in fact, to sustaining the study for a variety of complicated reasons. And we need to remember that just having racial concordant patients and healthcare providers is not enough for protection. So those are my thoughts about it. The other thing Dr. Hodge didn't have a chance to mention, but a couple of years ago, I was asked by the Milbank Memorial Fund. It's a public health foundation in New York, and they were important in the study because they provided the money for the burial insurance, and that supposedly kept a lot of the families in the study because it helped pay for the burials. And I did research for them about how they got involved in the study. And then they came to Tuskegee 2 years ago and did this amazing program of apology, and have moved forward of working with families of the survivors around public health issues in general. But one of the things that I found in doing the research, and I think it's worth thinking about, because at that point I really didn't think there was more to learn, and there's always more to learn, new questions to ask. And one of the things that I argued in this paper and in the research for them was that the importance of the autopsies wasn't so much because the burial insurance was given to the families, but because it made possible the autopsies, and therefore the scientists stayed in the study because they could do good science. So I think it's really important to think about how important that money was to the families that helped keep them in the study, but really how important getting the autopsies were, which kept the scientists going in the study. And if they hadn't been able to do quote unquote good science, would they in fact have stayed in the study at all? And so it's it's a story. What if questions are not great fun for historians, but it's worth at least thinking about it. And it made me think about changes in thinking about this. I think it's really critical to understand the importance of the families who are part of the Legacy Foundation that works all over the country now to bring messages about it. They did a wonderful message during the height of the COVID epidemic, where they talked about why, if anybody would not want to be vaccinated, it would be them, and why they were willing to be vaccinated. And I think they do heroic work for all of us politically and emotionally. And so I think in the end, in the face of the kinds of disparities there are in this country right now, the importance of having a national center that can help support research on not only the origins of these kinds of disparities, but what's being done to actually make things better. What kind of work really works? How can we look at and test different kinds of interventions that really make a difference? And it seems to me going forward, the center could be at the center of this. And then the last thing I want to say about that is, in a sort of interesting biblical irony, I think the study lasted for 40 years. And as a Jew, one of the things that happens at Passover is that we're supposed to tell our children the story of the wandering of the Jews out of Egypt, and we wandered for 40 years. My ancestors wandered for 40 years. The ancestors of the men in this study and their families wandered in a medical desert for 40 years, and we owe them the responsibility to tell that story as much as we can, not just to remember it, but to help embolden us to make a difference in this world. Thank you.
Wow. I want to encourage each person to write questions if you have any in the question box. Aria, can you please come on gallery? Yes, there she is. There's Aria. Good morning, Miss Aldrich. Good afternoon, Miss Aldrich. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing fine. So I want to encourage us to write our questions in the question Q&A box. Dr. Reverby said several things, and we're going to push on some questions later. But before we do that, we want to have Dr. Riggins Earl, and the after he presents, the way I envision this is for them who have been working this work way before I got here, and I'm so glad Dr. Ruben Warren is on. They could have a kind of a conversation in which we eavesdrop and sit back and see how best for us to move forward and do the best that we can, to make sure that the human rights violations never happen again. The public health violations never happen again. The medical violations never happen again. Whether it be in Berlin or be in Macon County, never happen again. But before I introduce Aria to introduce to you, Dr. Earl, there's two things that I just want us to keep. I kept hearing it in what Dr. Reverby was saying, but there are two things that I want to have that us keep in our minds. One is, I think probably when I first started at the National Center, Dr. Warren and I will have conversations up until about 2 o'clock in the morning sometimes. And one of the conversation had to do with trust and trustworthiness. What is trust and what is trustworthiness? And we had opportunity with Dr. Barbara Trug, Dr. Furrow, Lachlan Furrow, Christine Mitchell, Rebecca Brendel, all of Harvard Medical School Center for Bioethics. We met him each Friday, and we published a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine about trustworthiness before trust. And the week after that, Dr. Fauci was quoting from that document. The key part of that document is this: if we ever going to overcome what's happening in healthcare in America, those in the system, those in power, must represent trustworthiness. Trustworthiness is a moral virtue. Is a moral virtue. It's a moral value. It's something that we can do something about. Trust, on the other hand, has nothing to do with morality. It has to do with vulnerability. Trust has to do with making oneself vulnerable to someone or something else. When we make ourselves vulnerable, we put ourselves in a dangerous position, or we put ourselves in a blessed position. So it has to be, is incumbent upon those in power to be trustworthy and to act from a place of trustworthiness. So I want us to keep that in mind as we go through this conversation for the rest of this week, because trustworthiness must be central to everything that we do. Secondly, this afternoon, after the section after this one, is I invited this wonderful scholar who I have never met. I've never even heard her voice, but I found and read her work in my own research, and I was stunned that there's another David Hodge out there, and she's female, and her name is Dr. Keisha Ray. And so it's on the topic of Black bioethics. And how you doing? So there's a topic of Black bioethics, and her version and mine are different, but I think it's so important for us to do something similar to what Dr. Reverby and Dr. Earl is going to be doing, so us to have a conversation, because in 2024, each of us know about the Belmont Report, and each of us know that the Belmont Report needs revisiting. And so I was getting together with various colleagues at Primer and talking about Belmont too, and trying to initiate a conversation. But in the recent conversation I was being interviewed by some people, and they said, you need to forget about Belmont 2 and talk about the Tuskegee Report. The light went on in my head. No place better for that report to be generated than right here, as the moral epicenter that actually pushed the Belmont 1 or 2 to be better as we talk about Black bioethics. Okay, so Aria, my wonderful student, I would like for you to present to us Dr. Riggins Earl.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aria Ulrich. I'm a sophomore agricultural business major at Tuskegee University, and I have the esteemed pleasure of introducing Dr. Riggins Earl. Riggins Earl is a professor of ethics and theology at the Interdimensional Theological Center of the Atlanta University Center, where he has served for 30+ years. He holds the Ph.D. degree from Vanderbilt University in social ethics. He has done postdoctoral studies at Harvard and Boston University, respectively. Dr. Earl has done research at the London Institute for African Studies, taught in the Religious Studies Department of the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, and taught religion in the university and seminary contexts for 40 years. During that tenure, he has sought to be at the forefront of intellectual conversations about religion and the ethical and moral life, particularly as it relates to the Black African Americans. Dr. Earl Higgins, you can take it away.
Thank you, ma'am. Bless your bones. Very good. And the best to you in your studies, okay? Thank you. Let me, Dr. Hodge, thank you so much, and to all of the colleagues, especially Dr. Reverby and Dr. Warren. I've worked with all of you, and it is a good moment, and I'm looking forward also to hearing Dr. Ray. I've read her works and been very intrigued by her angle of interpretation. But let me, Dr. Reverby, we could just make this a kind of a, it's not cold enough down here in the South for a fireside chat, but if we can make this a kind of fireside chat that I used to enjoy when I was doing research up at in the New England area decades ago. But let's see if we can make this a fireside chat, because I think there are several things that ought to be brought to the surface here. And one has to do with marginality, of which you are not a stranger to, I'm sure, in terms of your ethnicity, and also of your intellectual querying that has blessed us and stimulated us in terms of this study. But here's what I want to at least one of the things I would like for you to address for us, and that is, and I had to learn it as a young Black student decades ago, studying also with Jewish intellectuals as well as Gentiles, as the biblical text says. But I had to learn and struggle with the issue of how, and I'm raising the question to try to help the African American audience or Black audience to try to better understand this. Why is it that, and don't hear it as an insult, I'm struggling with, where I want us to think about, how is it that you as a Jew and Jews have been so at the cutting edge of these intellectual conversations about African Americans?
Oh boy. Well,
let me share with you a statement that a Jewish
Okay.
professor made to me years ago at Vanderbilt, and I asked him. Well, he found out that he said, we have welcomed you into the Ph.D. program, but I want you to know, and I've read what you said you wanted to study, what you wanted to do, and I was intentional about studying the religious heritage or imagination or whatever from an ethical point of view of African Americans and those of African descent in the in the Black Atlantic world. And he said, he said, I know what you want to do, but you need, and he had a kind of gruffness in his voice, you need to come by my office and talk to me, because you need to You need to read the Jewish scholars and see what they say about what you're doing. I was a little rattled by the way he said it and what he said. And then I began to see, well, hell's bells, all I'm reading are Jewish scholars who have talked about African Americans. Very few, only a handful of Black scholars, if even a handful, whether it was Genovese or whoever. And I said, he's dead now, of course, been dead, but I wanted to go back and say, you know, you were right about this, and this has been an educational pilgrimage for me. And I have to ask myself the question, how is it that as an African American, I can get with my people and they can talk and talk and talk and talk for hours, but we won't write? Did you hear what I said?
I heard you.
Yeah. Why is it? What is it? And I think we don't think about this when we think about our religion, our Protestant religion as Blacks, that we are a people that has been partly created by the Jewish imagination. Whether it's the Bible, or whether it's science, or whether it's social science, natural science or social science. So what got you interested in this? Help us.
Okay. First of all,
Because it was right up under Tuskegee. Tuskegee hasn't had no professor that has written anything about this.
Right.
Now that would insult some people, but we have to deal with it. If we're going to help the next generation, Aldridge, if we're going to help your generation to change this behavior, we've got to take it seriously. And it can't just be something we talk about and get mad and say, oh, look at what all they did to us, etc. We have got to help you all to understand that you have got to join the national and international narrative and help us to better understand what has happened. Susan?
Okay. First of all, I just want to say, let me just hold on. Obviously, this is a huge topic, and in fact, the Du Bois Institute at one point had a whole series of discussions about Blacks and Jews. So it's a completely complicated story that can't be answered in 5 minutes here at all. And in the light of essentially speaking about this even now, given what's going on in Gaza and in Israel, is particularly difficult because clearly what happened, what Hamas did was horrendous, but what the Israelis are now doing in Gaza is horrendous and makes me crazy. And so, you know, it's not like any particular group has more morality than another. I don't believe that for a minute. So I want to try to answer a couple of the quick questions. I think part of the history of this has to do with, and I just came back from a trip where I was not in the Middle East, but I was in Middle Asia. I was in the Balkans and in Istanbul. And I was in Venice, and Venice has the first ghetto. That was actually, the word ghetto was actually an Italian word. So the first ghetto was actually for Jews in Venice. So if you think about the history of the diaspora of Jews from the Middle East over the centuries, it's always been one of being marginalized, being kept in a ghetto, being kept in one place, being favored by one particular ruler or another, and then carted off. So I was on Rhodes, and the history of the Jewish community there was they did fine under the Italians, and in 1943, when the Germans showed up, everybody got carted off to Auschwitz. And I can name the 200 family members of mine who perished during the Holocaust. So there is this sort of history of our own marginalization. I think that's really important. And it's also a history where people were limited to what they could do. So Jews weren't allowed to own land. They were allowed to be bankers, but they couldn't own this or that. So there's a whole history of learning that, and we also think of ourselves as a people of the book. So there's a lot of interpretation of the Bible, a lot of reading, a lot of writing, and also, frankly, having gone to services in other places, I'm always struck by how bloody long synagogue services are. So we end up getting what's called in German Sitzfleisch, that is the ability to sit for long periods of time, which I think helps you in the archives for sure. So I think there is a kind of sense of people who were literate early, who learned how to write, although often not women, by the way. But I think that matters, and I think that's what drew a lot of us in part into the academy. And into writing because of that kind of history. And then for me personally about Tuskegee, I actually got into it because, I mean, I knew about the study as a historian of medicine, and I was actually at a conference in Atlanta with my friend Darlene Clark-Hine, one of our major historians of the African-American experience. And Darlene had written a book called Black Women in White, which is on the history of Black women in nursing. And we had to stay overnight at the conference. And we went to see Miss Everest Boys, the play that's the fictionalization of the study, because it was playing in Atlanta. And we're coming home in the cab from it. And the play centers on Eunice Rivers, the African-American nurse whose picture is probably, you can see back there on my wall. So we were coming back in the cab, and I said to Darlene, you know, you didn't write much about her. You should write about her. And she said, well, she doesn't interest me. She interests you. You should write about her. And I said, oh, come on, Darlene, I'm a white woman. This is not, I shouldn't be in this, because at that point there were real issues about, I mean, despite what you read, at least in history, there were fewer and fewer white folks writing about Black history at that moment in time. And Darlene said, no, you should do it. She interests you, and I'll run interference for you if there's trouble. And she did, actually. At one point when someone gave me a hard time, she really just stood up and said, look, I told her to do it, and you should judge the work by what's in the work, not by what she said. So I thought I was going to write the book about Nurse Rivers. And then I got to Tuskegee, because in the play, she gives all this testimony in the Senate. But of course, David Felshew, the playwright, made it all up. She never testified at the Senate. So when I got to Tuskegee and started to do the research, I realized there wasn't A, enough material to write about her, and B, I didn't want her to carry the weight of the study, that some of the criticism of the play itself is how much the moral issues of the study get put on her. And I thought that was really wrong. And so I ended up by then collecting all this material anyway. That's how the books happened. And then, of course, I got captured by the issue. I got captured by Tuskegee, frankly, even before I met my husband. I got captured by Tuskegee and its place in American history and its importance in the American thing. And I actually wrote a whole chapter that never made it into the book called Tuskegee and the African-American Imagination, which looked at all the different fictional ways the study, I mean, the town and the university had been seen over the generations, from some, you know, Booker T. Washington's own imagination all the way up to Debbie McDowell's Leaving Pipestem, her autobiography, when she's in Tuskegee in the 70s. So, you know, I just got fascinated by it. So I think that's the long history of sort of how I got into it and why it matters. It really matters to me, and has mattered to me for a very long time now.
Thank you. I found what you said most intriguing, especially about the discipline of sitting. Yes. And I hope that the students who hear this, not only at Tuskegee, but Black students at wherever they are, can appreciate what you said there, because there has to be, you know, we've been stereotyped as Black people of being great runners and, you know, fast and quick at the mouth and quick in the legs and feet and all of that. But we haven't dealt with the fact that it's hard, that when you come into a culture or society, or yes, a culture that has a certain kind of expectation and discipline, that sitting it requires a discipline of its own. And also it's a new writing to me is it's a new definition of community. That we often see community as being when a group of people get together. But writing is when you get together with a group of scholars and their ideas, whether it's in the archives. I went back and I've been reading the report that you did to the Milbank Foundation. And I hope that I hope that a lot of teachers, especially university professors at a place like Tuskegee will use this, because here it shows the roadmap to the making of this study. I mean, it's an eye-opener. If you want to see the roadmap that the bureaucratic leaders of America, how they charted the path that wound up being the syphilis study at Tuskegee. This is the report, almost 100 pages, or about 75, 80. You need to read, because this is not fast reading. You've got to read it and think about it and listen and hear the voices, etc. But in reading it, you will see that, oh my God, this is the way people were thinking in the 1920s and the 1930s, and the way they were thinking about the people, African Americans, who had a little of nothing. Now, I go back and read not just yours, but I read the making of Meharry Medical College. Dr. Warren is a product of that great school. But in what was it? It was at 86 it was founded, Dr. Warren. And anyway, it was founded after Reconstruction, and the first medical school in the South for Blacks. But then you began to raise the question, okay, what were the conversations going on in a Black medical school in the South after Reconstruction? And who were the teachers? And what were the ethical challenges? Poverty obviously was one, but how were they thinking? How were the medical professors getting students, or the few Black ones who were there? Because they didn't start out with a lot of Black physicians, professors, a lot of Black physicians who were professors. They had to be trained. Just as Tuskegee did not, miraculously, Tuskegee started out with Black professors who had been educated and were teaching Black students. And some scholars point out that this perhaps it did something to the psyche of Black students, that here their professors were African American, and they were able to shape the consciousness of these people who had recently, at least they were the descendants of those who had come out of slavery, if not, some of them had been former slaves themselves. So this is another kind of challenge. I challenge you to read who was the historian who gave us Black History Week. Remember, Washington, D.C. Somebody help me out there.
Yeah.
A Black historian who gave us
Carter G. Woodson.
Carter G. Woodson. But somebody has done a fascinating book on, it's called The Pedagogy of the Fugitive. And it is a fascinating interpretation of Woodson's theory of education for the oppressed. And the writer helps us to see that we've rushed so fast to get to integration that we really did not plow through and unlayer the presuppositions that Carter G. Woodson was working with. He too, remember, was a he was a PhD, what, University of Chicago? I know he got his PhD. I think Du Bois was from Harvard, and the first from Harvard, and I think Carter G was the first from University.
He was Harvard too.
Well, he was Harvard too. Okay, yeah, I think maybe that's why he and Du Bois had a hard time getting along. But yeah, I think you're right. He was from Harvard. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Warren. But the what I'm trying to get at is, if the Tuskegee syphilis study does not, and this frightens some people because of what I'm going to say, but if it's not an intellectual exploration, as well as an exploration to try to bring about change, without it being an intellectual journey in a society that puts so much emphasis on, maybe not like it used to, but the reality is the bureaucrats are the people who control Washington, D.C., or the people who control Wall Street, are people who are being informed and guided by the intellectual community. That's one of the things I say to Black students. If you don't get that in your heads, don't think you can just go out here and make a lot of noise and change this society. You have got to work with, where have we been in this nation? Who charted the course of destiny in this nation? If I'm to understand racism, I can't understand it just by saying all white people are racist. That's a terrible generalization. It is that they created a racist system, but all white people are not, maniacally prejudiced. There are those that some of us have worked with a long time ago, even in the civil rights movement, who were so vital to helping us to understand better what was going on in places we could not go or see. So these are the kind of questions and concerns that your study, Dr. Reverby, has raised for me in terms of trying to better understand how it is and why it is that we have to rear up children who have children in the Black community who want to do these kinds of studies and who will sacrifice to do them. To look at the way the Milbank Foundation used its monies to work on the scientific study of diseases, is, to me, is just fascinating. And the way not only the Milbank Foundation, but so many of the foundations guided the making of public policy in this country. If we don't get it, if we don't get that, we miss it. Because to have a bioethics center at Tuskegee means that we have to have people who are looking at the way public policy works in this country, who shapes it, and where the money is, and how who can get to the money, because there's very few people can get to the money from these foundations or from the federal government. So if people are not trained to do that and know how to do it and know how to reach the people and touch the people who know where the money is and know what the money is being used for and know politically why the money is being used in the way it's being used and to what group is it seeking to satisfy, or what group's interest is it seeking to satisfy. Those are ethical issues for me. And let me stop, Dr. Reverby, and you might have some response to that.
Just briefly, because I'm also mindful of of time for the next discussion. I want to make sure we have time for Dr. Ray. So I think there's been a long history of trying to understand sort of how public policy gets made. There's a really good book. I think it's Nancy McLean. It's called Chains of Democracy, but it looks at sort of the funding from the right that made possible sort of the rise of what's going on politically right now and in this country. And I think we're at a serious moment for all of us when more than half the country thinks it's okay for someone who has lied and cheated his whole life would be okay to be president. I find that really terrifying, and I think it's a real failure of American education in some ways, that we're at this point where people think that facts don't matter, where people can make up whatever they want, they can yell at a judge, they can do whatever they want and get away with literally with murder in this case, I think. And so I think it's really important for us to think about understanding sort of how these education things happen, what the bureaucracies are. I think that you've argued that very well. And I think it's really important for us to understand how the plutocracy and the very, very, very wealthy are able to fund these kinds of research institutes and where that comes from. And then we have to, but I think more than that, at this point, we also have to think about how do we create, and it seems to me that's the point of the center, a different intellectual center. How do we move the ball off of a particular place and move it here so that the voices and the perspectives of people who have been more marginalized historically, but certainly absolutely have brilliant ideas and thoughts about all of this need to be heard and multiplied. And so my hope in the future is that the center becomes the center of making that possible.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Hodge. We want to hear Dr. Ray, but thank you.
No, we have time because Dr. Ray comes on at 3:30. But
3:30, yeah, okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, but right now though we have so Ms. Aldridge is going to pick questions out of the Q&A and read them and the presenters could answer. I want to encourage those who are guest facilitators this week, even though this is not your particular time, that if you choose, you can join in either answering questions or responding to questions if you have a particular unique perspective. So so Ms. Aldridge, also one of the questions I see is coming from Dr. Lachlan Furrow, my colleague and brother, I asked him to serve as a co-chair for the advisory council. And so he is on and he has one of the questions. So Ms. Aldridge, you could take it away.
Absolutely. And Dr. Reverby and Dr. Earl, I just wanted to express gratitude for your insightful discussion this afternoon. It was truly enlightening and of great significance. So I want to start with our first question, which is for Dr. Reverby.
Mm-hmm.
In light of your experience as a Du Bois Center Fellow, how might the National Center get started in creating a steadily growing and closely knit community of fellows/scholars contributing to the Tuskegee healing efforts, starting and radiating from Tuskegee/Macon County, which must be sustained for decades to succeed in eliminating unconscionable disparities?
Okay, well, I was not a fundraiser for the Du Bois and Hutchins Institute. I just was I received the money from them. But the trick really there, like a lot of institutes, is the fundraising. So Skip Gates, Henry Louis Gates Jr. is a brilliant fundraiser. There's no getting around it, and it's the Harvard name. But you have the Tuskegee name and the moral center of what Tuskegee could mean. I thought it was somehow hilarious that I'm writing from Du Bois to the people in Booker T. Washington land when I was there. So it seems to me part of it has to be a fundraising strategy, because the only way to make this work is to figure out a way to build an endowment for the center and, for Tuskegee in general, and whatever the politics are of working out that relationship is beyond my pay grade, but that's how it works. You have to figure out a way to get the money that makes that possible so that the people can come to Alabama and spend a year on their sabbaticals or away from their work so that they can talk to each other and learn from each other. But that's basically how every research institute that exists in the country for people who are scholars to go to, is that there's money, or at least find a way for people to match half. So if you're a full-time faculty member and you go on sabbatical, most universities and colleges will give you half your salary. So if you could figure out a way to sort of meet that other half, then it would help people come to Alabama, or to figure out a way to participate now that Zoom exists, maybe not physically there, although there's nothing like the kind of serendipity that happens when you're next door to somebody. I always think my work, I used to joke that my first book would look completely different. And I've been on top of the econ department. I was on top of the philosophy department, and that's who I had coffee with every morning. So, and so the book took the shape of my conversations with a guy in the philosophy department, not someone in the econ department. So I think that sort of proximity to other people thinking about broadly the same kind of issues that you have really does matter. But like everything else in this world, it takes fundraising to make that possible and to create an intellectual center for this. But I think the time is right for that. And I do think we could try and push for that.
Your next question is for you again, Dr. Reverby. And it says that, is the John Cutterly report available on YouTube?
Is what available on YouTube?
The John Cutterly report.
The John Cutler movie? You mean the movie?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't think so, but I have the clip of it. So I could, if somebody's interested, they can just write to me. It's S. Reverby, at Wellesley, which is where I taught. WELLESLE, or write to Dr. Hodge and he'll give you my email address, and I'd be glad to send someone the materials. And I also have the clip from the Saturday Night Live thing is worth watching. If you're anybody teaching or trying to think about this, is worth watching, but that you can get on YouTube. That particular clip I think is a little harder to find on YouTube, but Cutler is really important, not only because of what he said, but then what happened to me is that I was doing more work on him, and I ended up finding this study that had been done between 1946 and 48 in Guatemala, in which the United States Public Service and the Guatemalan venereal disease people had actually been infecting people. And I worked to get an apology from President Obama about that study. I worked with people at CDC on that, and that material is very available as well. So anybody could write to me. I'd be glad to help them find any of the material. I'd be glad to share anything that I have, and to point people in whatever direction they want to go in around this research.
All right. And this is for both Dr. Reverby and Dr. Earl. At the National Center, we are stressing the importance of the moral determinants of health and of death, and how those drive the social and political determinants. How can that framing help us understand and address/change the deepest underlying problems we continue to have? Any concrete example of an issue for which that could be powerful would be useful.
Okay, Dr. Earl, you want to try it first?
Okay, I don't mind. My response to that would be that's a very, very challenging question. Primarily because the center has so few resources, and it's just it needs a lot of financial help at this point, as Dr. Hodge would readily let us know. But my concern also is, and I think this is the problem as I have tried to understand the papers, or at least the narrative of the committee that helped struggle with, once it got the monies, to struggle with what the center would look like, or the model they would use, etc. I think the problem is that, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but let me put it this way. Sometimes it's hard for us to think about what does it mean to have a center in an educational institution? What does it mean to have a research center in an educational institution, especially in the Black community? Because so often what I hear, and I've been in this work for all of my life, But so often I hear, all of my professional life, I hear us say in the Black community, well, you know, we've got to save, we've got so much to do with so little to do it with. And then we're looking back over our shoulder concerned that, okay, what white people will say is if we get the money, you all didn't do anything with the money. Well, hell, they get bukus of money that they don't do anything with as far as we can see. But we get very sensitive to the fact that we didn't do anything to show that we can physically measure and say, this is what we did. We ran 10 dogs down the track and we've been building a dog track. No, that's in a university that takes itself seriously. All work is not something you can measure physically. There are ideas that are so critical to the development of a people. And if they don't struggle with those ideas, it's like, let me just stop here and point out Ralph Ellingson's Invisible Man. Some people would have probably said in those days he was wasting his time, whether he's crazy. But if we didn't have Invisible Man, if we hadn't had it, my generation hadn't had it, we would not be where we are and would not have made the progress that we made in the fight against segregation and racism in this country. Ellingson helped us to see ourselves in that narrative. And it might be that Tuskegee, the Bioethics Center, it needs to be resourced. It's got to be resourced to help the genius and the imagination that Brother Hodge brings. But we also need to get over that serious complex that we have to be the messianic institution to the world. We can't do that. But we can help to change things. And some change is like, what I call the termite revolution. You don't see what termites are doing until they have done it. And so it is in the universities and graduate schools. We don't see in the humanities, we don't see all the good that we're doing. Sometimes 20 years later, 30 years later, you meet somebody and they are helping to change the society. And you say, oh my God, you're not a doctor? No. You're not a lawyer? No. What are you? And he says, I'm a writer. I'm a writer. Well, what the hell is that? I used to teach at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, right? And I would have Black and white students, especially a lot of the white students whose parents wanted them to go on and, become the lawyer, the doctor, or whatever. And that's not as big as it used to be. A lot of them now want to be athletes because, the people who make the money in this society now are not always the lawyers and the doctors, right? They are the people who the Deion Sanders and those people who are just, buckets of money. But what I came to see is in teaching some of these students that the writer is critical because we need people who help us to try to help us to interpret why Gaza, why Israel, why Ukraine. We need the historian to help us to try to understand what were the antecedents to all of this. And the people who we don't see and who are thinking behind closed doors are the people who are helping to shape the destiny of the nation. So Tuskegee, I think you said intellectual. Somebody said that. Was it you, Susan, who said that if the center takes on a kind of intellectual posture? You didn't. I'm paraphrasing now, but those one of the things that I use when I first started going down, this was long before when the center was in its early days, and there were people who would say to me, well, we want you to come down and talk about religion or ethics. But what they were talking about is they wanted me to bring a little homily or something, or a sermon. I'm not interested in doing that. I want to know, what are your presuppositions about religion, and how do they undergird what you do at the center? Yes, I know the people that go to church in Macon County don't talk like that, but they have children who are struggling with in even at the university. We have to struggle with the questions of religion as it relates to politics, whether it's in the Middle East or whether it's in the old Soviet Union, or whether it's in South Africa. They have got to struggle with the politics of beliefs, whether they're religious beliefs or whether they are scientific beliefs. So it seems to me that the center, if it has to work on becoming a place that we have people who come in, and what it looks like the people surrounding us will look at us and say, they just waste time. Every time I see them, they're over there talking to each other, or they're reading papers or whatever. Without they're wasting time, because Washington is when I was a boy coming up, they used to say Washington, D.C. is a paper pushing industry. That's all it does, is pushes papers. People, they got reams and reams every day, people running off all this stuff. And half of it, most of the people don't read, but there are some people who put it together, and they shape the consciousness of the people who are making the motions and driving the policy.
Okay, thank you so much. You all have said some things, and I'm so glad that Dr. Warren is here today. And let me ask you, Dr. Warren, was there anything you'd like to share before I share something that I want to share about what you've heard so far?
I've been impressed every time I listen to both Dr. Reverby and Dr. Earl. I learned something new, and it reinforces something that I thought I knew. It gets clearer. So I appreciate both of their contributions. But I want to add one thing that I think the center has done and continues to do, and that we have a journal. And that journal marks history that will tell our story, and it's in PubMed. It's everywhere. So the story will be told by the people who have that journal, and Dr. Hodge is the editor. So our story will be told from our lens, and I'm real proud that has happened.
So thank you, Dr. Warren. So I made some notes of things I wanted to say. And the first one is journal. So you're right on point. What Dr. Earl and Dr. Reverby, what you all said today, both encouraging, because this is exactly what I wanted. First of all, to get the reflection from the elders, those who were here in the beginning, or the conception, before the beginning, that is, in the conception of the beginning, those of you who were here, and then to start as we plot and plan out, because the road ahead, it's interesting, and it's exciting. It is challenging more than it is daunting. I am not daunted at all. I'm excited, actually, because we have opportunities. Dr. Reuben Warren, he left 4 things that I want to mention now, that is going to help us go through, get to the next, get to where we're trying to go. Number 1, the journal. The journal was not here before he established it here. as it is, the Journal of Healthcare, Science, and Humanities. The purpose of the journal, now as a PubMed journal, is to give access to every scholar, especially those scholars who were turned down by the England Journal of Medicine, because their work is just as quality as anything else that has been published in the New England Journal of Medicine. But everyone, they can't publish everybody. But at the same time, our goal is to help people publish. That means if your document is rejected with comments from which a person could reconstruct their research, reconstruct their ideas, and then put them out again. If it's rejected again, we stay with you. I remember at one particular person, I gave about 5 pages of bibliographical information. I said, check these out. And she kept coming back, and then she's published in our journal. So that's one thing. Well, a great man by the name of Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, he said, if you could control communication, you could limit the oppression that you face. And therefore, we have something for which we could communicate ideas, and that is the journal. Secondly, we have something that's even greater than the journal. Dr. Warren put in my hands the Bioethics Honors Program. We got some young people who are smarter than us. And know there's a whole lot of Ph.D. on the screen right now, with Aria being one of those young people. They're smarter than we are. If you don't believe me, if you can't get your phone to work, just give your phone to one of these young people. just say, hey, just give your grandchild, your godchild, just say, hey, do something with this. And they're brilliant. They came out of the womb. They can't write it down. Their fingers don't know how to, they never use those muscles, so their penmanship is horrible. But I asked my children, my sons, I said, well, when did you learn how to type? They said, I don't know. They came out of the womb typing. So the Bioethics Honor students, they continue to impress me and to push me. And now the GPAs of the average GPA for the Bioethics Honors Program is 3.5 and climbing, because so many, I will speak to 10 students in one day and each of them have a 4.0. They said they're smarter than us. So there it is. And this is having a 4.0 at Tuskegee University. Thirdly, this that we're on right now, the Public Health Ethics Intensive, for us to be able to have someone like Dr. Ray to come on and be an advocate for Black bioethics, to have a forum where we could put it out there and understand that there's something unique going on in the African-American / Black community that is not occurring in other communities. That's why Black Lives Matter has to be stated, because forget the silliness of what may be going on in Black Lives Matters. The momentum and the statement has its own power, independent of the movement and any other silliness. So therefore, we're working on that with the PHEI. I mean, there's a young man, he just popped off, but you saw his little picture, because he's a therapist for young people, Mr. Sonny Etienne. He is going to do a brilliant job on Thursday talking to those young people. And tomorrow I think he speaks on mental health. But he's a hip hop therapist. If you want to find out what that is, tune in tomorrow. You'll see that what that is in reality. And then the third thing that we're doing is something we're beginning in January of next year. Is called 625 Now, the 625 Men of the Syphilis Study. What does that mean now? Exclamation point. We want to each month produce a podcast or a YouTube podcast of the topics that we discuss now. That is autism, mental health, suicide prevention, and lupus. Each quarter of next year, we'll be discussing those topics so that we don't just do them and drop them and move on. We're going to be able to measure. And because once you can measure these things, Dr. Reverby, especially when we're seeking funding, when we could say that we have done this, that, and the other, then we could actually have a legacy. And so that's why I'm eternally grateful for Dr. Reuben Warren and Dr. Earl for introducing me to Dr. Reuben Warren, because right now, somewhere, there is a 13-year-old girl in Kenya. There's a 13-year-old boy in Ukraine. There is a 13-year-old child in Gaza. And right up the street, or across the street, there's a 13-year-old Israeli little girl. and they're waiting for us to say something or do something. And that's why we do what we do. If we flood our wings fast enough, it's going to affect someone on the other side of the planet. I am grateful really for Dr. Lachlan Furrow, because as an interlocutor, we don't always agree, but we agree sufficiently enough on the most important things. That's human rights. And therefore, we could push each other towards a critical tension. So in the end, we have a result where somebody escapes. So we want to thank you so much, Dr. Earl. Please, I hope you all don't go anywhere. If you could stay in, because you got to hear Dr. Ray, Dr. Earl, and Dr. Reverby. You all are my heroes, Dr. Ruben Warren. You're literally my heroes. I got goosebumps right now because I'm in the midst of my heroes right here.